Hi, I'm Mark Wafer, and I'm a Tim Horton franchisee from Toronto. In the last 20 years, we've employed 122 people with disabilities, and every one of those positions was meaningful and in a competitively paid position, which means that a person with a disability working for us earns a full wage, and that's very important. If you look at the demographic of disability across Canada today, 15.5% of Canadians have a disability. Now, according to StatsCan, 50% of those are unemployed. However, we know that that number is a little bit conservative because today in Canada, there's over 400,000 recent graduates with a disability who have never worked. And of those, 270,000 have a post-secondary education and have never worked. Now, if they've never worked and never paid taxes, they can't be counted in unemployment numbers. So therefore, we know the real unemployment numbers for people with disabilities in Canada is approaching 70%. Now, why is that? The main reason is because businesses, HR departments, hiring managers are still buying into a series of myths and misperceptions that if they hire somebody with a disability, that person will work slower, require more supervision, work in a less safe manner, be less innovative. The reality is, when we build capacity in our businesses, people with disabilities, we're bringing massive change to our business, massive economic change. I'm not talking about little incremental differences. I'm talking about real big change. Let me give you some examples. Now, at the moment, I have 250 employees in my 6 Tim Horton stores. 46 of those employees have a disability. That's every type of disability. That's in every department, including management. My absenteeism rate for my 46 employees with a disability is 85% lower than the 200 who don't. And there's a cost associated with absenteeism. When you look at safety, for example, people who have a disability tend to work in a more safe manner. People who are deaf are more aware of their surroundings. People who have cerebral palsy and are in a wheelchair are less likely to get out of that wheelchair and climb onto a rickety ladder in order to get something off the top shelf. In the last 20 years, with 122 people hired with a disability, I have never filled out a workplace insurance claim or a workplace injury on anybody who has a disability. There goes that myth. Innovation is greater. Now, why is that? Well, if we think about a person who's in a wheelchair, gets up in the morning, takes a shower, makes breakfast, gets in the elevator, goes down into the parking garage, gets in their car, and drives to work. They already have different problem-solving skills. Now in the workplace, different problem-solving skills is how innovation is created. Therefore, by hiring people with disabilities, you have a more innovative workforce, which leads to a competitive edge over your competitors who do not hire people with disabilities. But of course, the big thing is, and the big economic benefit to any business, is lower turnover. The average turnover for a Tim Hortons in most communities in Canada, and that's not just Tim Horton, we're talking about the whole QSR sector, quick service restaurant. The annual turnover of employees is 100 to 125%, and that's considered normal. That's normal for a well-run operation. But in my group of 6 stores, it's 38%, and has been for the last 7 years. It's not because I'm a better operator, it's because I'm an inclusive employer. Now, the 46 people who have a disability didn't leave last year. None of them did, and that's great. But if we look at the 200 employees who don't have a disability, their turnover rate last year was 55%, exactly half the average for a QSR sector. Now, why is that? It's because people who don't have a disability want to be involved in an inclusive environment. They want to be involved in something special. And so their turnover rate remains low as well. You put that into dollars and cents so that businesses can understand the impact of this. For me to replace one person in my store at an entry-level position, the person who poured your coffee this morning, perhaps at Tim Horton, that cost me anywhere from $3,000 to $4,000 to replace just that one person. I have interviewing, I have new uniforms, I have training, I have less productivity of a new employee versus someone who's been with for a long time. So the cost is high. And if my turnover rate is 38%, but my colleague who's doing just as good a job as I am is at 100%, I make more money. And that's the economic case for inclusion right there. Even if you ignore all the other things I said and just focus on turnover, as a business, you cannot afford not to be an inclusive employer. The interesting piece of information, though, the interesting piece of data, is that, as I said, 15.5% of the population have a disability. And there are some businesses in town who might think to themselves, I can afford to ignore that. That's a small demographic, despite it being the entire population of Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and Alberta combined as the population of Canada, as a percentage of the population of Canada. Some businesses will still think they can ignore 15.5% because they think it's still a small niche market. Now, you take that person who has a disability and you add in their immediate family member, mom, dad, brother, sister, son, daughter, and we're now at 53% of the Canadian population. And that is a number no business in Canada can afford to ignore. The greatest barrier that a person with a disability faces in order to get into the workplace, as I said, is the myths and misperceptions. But when we really boil it down, it's attitude. It's the attitude of employers, it's the attitude of HR departments, it's the negative attitude that they have towards the disability community. Let's face it, we're all disabled at some point in our lives. We're all disabled whether we break a leg while we're skiing or we get sick. We have a temporary disability. At some point in our lives, we all have a disability. And if you can imagine how difficult it is today to get a job, especially if you're a young person, the unemployment already running so high, it's a frustrating experience. It leads to anger because you just can't find that job. You've gone to school for 5 years and you feel you're entitled to that job and you still can't find it. Now add in disability. You can imagine how much more difficult it is. And that all comes down to the attitude of employers. If employers can see that there's a clear financial benefit by hiring people with disabilities because of what they bring to the table, businesses will open doors because, quite frankly, they can't afford not to.